I felt like I had to make a video talking about my experience watching the show Severance and then my theories for the show up until the most recently released episode, which is season 2, episode 3. So this is going to be super chock full of spoilers up until that point. And yeah, let's get going. So I'm only going to cover things that I either really want to talk about and really get my opinion out there on, or things that I haven't heard anybody else say, or like not that many people say. I'm not going to cover super common theories, I guess, maybe. I might briefly touch on it, but I won't go deep into it. So, first I'm going to start with the known information at this point, and I'm not talking about things that are like blatantly a fact. Just things that I think the show has leaned into so heavily or made pretty clear that we can safely assume is a fact at this point, or at least canon to the story. One is that whoever Helly is on the severed floor is not the original Helly that we had come to know. Now, I'll get further into what I think is going on there, but what I have here is that we know this. She at least didn't have the same exact experience that everybody else did, because she exited the elevator. The first time we saw her back on the severed floor, she ran out of the elevator, and we've been shown at least 3 different times that when you come back to on the elevator, if you are doing something like stressful or super physical right before them, you go right back to that state. We saw it when Helly tried to hang herself, and when she came back to the elevator the next time, she still felt like she was being strangled and was freaking out in the corner. We saw it when Irving got off the elevator and he was still banging on the door, and we saw it when Mark found Helly after she had tried to hang herself, and he was panicked and freaked out, and he was in the same exact state. We saw Helly last getting tackled on stage when the OTC ran out. And what did we see when she was getting off the elevator? She was sprinting off the elevator. So at the very least, either that's not Helly R, or that was not the first time she had gone back to her Helly R state. So, we have that information. And I think it's pretty obvious that Coble feels some kind of guilt or responsibility for whatever happened to Gemma, and by extension, what has happened to Mark and how he feels. So here are my speculations. It's a pretty long list. The first thing I have on here is that I think it's most likely that Helly was reintegrated with Helena. Or I guess Helena has been reintegrated. I think that because of everything I just said, I don't think there's any more evidence needed that something fishy is up other than her sprinting off the elevator. Obviously, there's everything else. She lied about what her innie does. She isn't acting the same. She hesitated to kiss Mark. Just everything that's been pointed out. I think it's most likely that she was reintegrated. And that's because the show is just making it so obvious that it's not Helly, that I think there must be something else to it. And that's what I can think. And we can then jump to the conclusion that now that Helly has access to Helena's memories and vice versa, now maybe Helly fully understands what Helena is up to, how Helena is feeling, why Helena is doing what she's doing. And if you've lived the kind of creepy, weird, sheltered cult life that Helena Egan has lived, Helly was probably really shocked and maybe a lot more empathetic to what was going on and why she feels such a either a dedication to her family's cause or maybe antagonism towards her family's cause. We don't know yet. That's another one of my possible theories. Yeah, and of course, it's also possible that the person that's on the seventh floor is just Helena, and the show just wanted to make it really obvious. I don't know why they wouldn't have just told us that information, though, and made it clear if that's all that was going on. And from what we've been told, that shouldn't be possible. We've been told that it's kind of like an automatic thing that happens when you go down the elevator. Your chip automatically switches you into your other personality. But I think most people have suspected that that is not fully true. I've heard some people suggest that it could just be somebody turning everything on and off, and that's actually why they stagger the entrances and exits, to make sure that they can flip the switch at the right time. That kind of clashes with another one of my theories. So I think that the reason they have not shown Irving's return to his outie self after the OTC is because it will show that him and Bert already knew each other outside of Lumen. Maybe they were working together. Maybe they had some kind of a relationship. I don't know. But I also think the show kind of really leaned into the fact that they did know each other on the... This is more of like a looking back now. I remember the first time he saw Bert outside of Miss Casey's office, and it was kind of like the opposite of how Miss Coble looked at that bodyguard at the end of episode 3. It was like the most warm... The way Bert looked, or the way Irving looked at Bert, was the most like warm, like happy, loving, like relief feeling when he saw Bert in that lobby. And it changed his entire life and personality as he knew it after he ran into Bert in that lobby. So it would make sense if they know each other on the outside, whether it's in a professional or romantic way. I don't know. So, speaking of the way Miss Coble looked at the bodyguard, I do have a theory for that. There's not really a reason for it. I just think that it kind of fits with everything else that I think. We know that I guess she's just called Coble. I don't know. We know that Coble has very, very good, people reading skills. She knew that any mark had taken over the second that it happened. She can always sense when something's wrong with him. I don't know if that's speaking more to like there's something weird going on with Mark that we haven't even begun to suspect yet. But I do want to point that out because I think what she saw when she looked at that bodyguard and she studied his face and his mannerisms is I think she noticed that Grainer was inside of the bodyguard. And the reason I think this is just because they had like a really close kind of friendship or even romantic relationship, and the show made a point of pointing that out, and this would make sense as to why, so there would be some kind of explanation for how she looked at him and she looked in his eyes and noticed who it was. Maybe it doesn't have all his memories, but it's his personality. I'm still not sure how all that would work. So, if she were to realize that, and, obviously the people in this company and in this world do not have that strong of reactions to the dead being reanimated or seeing your loved one's personalities in other bodies. That's not what freaked her out. What would freak her out would be something that would shake her belief system to its core, and that is because if Grainer's personality, memories, whatever, are inside of this bodyguard, this random guy, then they would have had to have gotten his chip somehow. Probably Helena had something to do with it. For them to have his chip, she knows because I'm assuming that his body has not been, well, I don't know. Yeah, his body was not found, right? Because it was dragged away by Ragabi. So, Koval put together, when she noticed that Grainer was inside of this bodyguard, she realized that the Egans probably know all about reintegration and are probably even working with Ragabi, and that's how they had Grainer's body, and that's how they got his chip, and that's how they put it in this guy. And I think that scared the crap out of her, because she'd been spending this whole time like thinking she was, I'm assuming, thinking she was going to finally prove herself by showing the Egans what she had discovered, all her hard work, and I think that just kind of shattered that for her and scared her, because obviously it had to do with this guy. Some people, I've heard some reviews say that they think she just like randomly realized that she would get murdered. I don't think that's it. It definitely had to do with the bodyguard, and that's my best theory. Which, by the way, that further supports my theory that Helena has the ability to get reintegrated, which would explain why when Koval left, looking very worried and upset and scared, Helena also looked scared when Koval turned around and drove away, because at that point she knew that Koval knew what was going on. And I do think that Helena has some undercover stuff going on. As to what extent, I'm not sure, but I do not think she's just like a mindless drone. I mean, nobody is. I get further into that later, which this kind of has a little bit of a bleak conclusion. But I think that Dylan's wife is a security guard at Lumen. I've heard others point out that she definitely is. Apparently, there's like even a symbol on her uniform. So she works at Lumen too, as a security guard. That's how she knows Milichik's first name. I don't know what else that means. Probably nothing. I think people are pretty on point with the idea that they're trying to sever the relationship between Dylan and the rest of his team. I'll add this part about Milchick next. So one thing I just pointed out is that all the leaders we've been introduced to, with the exception of the CEO, have been shown to not be blindly devoted to the company. Even Koval, who had a shrine in her house and her whole life has been dedicated to this company and this religion, essentially, even she was able to kind of like curse God, I guess, at the end of it. She ran away scared from Helena. You know, I think that this is... And Natalie, we saw the way she reacted after she gave those beautiful paintings to Mr. Milchick. We saw the way, and I want to get into that. And then Helena, at the very least, obviously was intrigued by her Innie's relationship with Mark, if not more than intrigued, and wanted to like have that entire relationship for herself. So... And then we get down to Milchick. I think that there's a possibility and maybe even a likelihood that he is just trying to do his job, and he's just trying to do a good job. He just wants to get promoted. He wants to have like a good life, and he's proud of his work, and he wants his bosses to be proud of his work as well, which... The paintings are a big slap in the face, kind of rubbing his nose in the fact of like, you'll never be an Egan. This is about as far as you're going to get in this company. And that could be what that was indicating. There could also be more like he's plotting against the company. It could go either way, because one thing that I do think happened is that at least while Coble was there, he was supporting the we'll call it the macro dat uprising. He was supporting that. He left the book out, and after it went missing, he didn't look for it. And either that could have just been an oversight of the show, or a logical one from Coble and Milchick, because they just didn't really grasp what kind of an effect it would have on letting your like completely brainwashed fascist population read outside literature for the first time. They might have genuinely like not understood the kind of impact it would have, and they just didn't care that they had the book. The other thing is that probably the main thing, obviously he didn't like the paintings, and he took them and he put them away on a shelf. And then lastly, he showed Dylan that the overtime contingency was possible. And I don't think he did this because it was an emergency that Dylan took that little card. He could have figured out where that card was by using any of like the hundreds of surveillance cameras they have in that place. They very easily could have figured out where the card was. It wasn't that big of a deal. He showed Dylan that that was possible because he wanted to. And then I think he provoked Dylan the next day in the office. And he did it in a way so that like he kind of had an excuse to leave the office so Dylan could have a chance to tell everybody what happened and make him mad enough to tell him what happened. Something I have not heard anybody else say is, and I don't know if it's important, it would be more important if Milchick is somehow trying to take down the company. I think that's probably less likely. This could have also had to do with just wanting to get Coble fired, and he knew all this would end up leading to Coble getting fired because she's the one in charge, and this was all going to end up coming back on her. Anything that Milchick messed up was going to end up coming back on her. So somebody had to have been there helping Milchick to let him to let him go see Dylan that night, and it couldn't have been Coble. Because he asked Dylan not to tell her the next day, and two, she was at her house. We saw her at her house. Technically, we don't know the timing, but what would be the point of the show having Milchick tell Dylan not to tell her if she knew about it? I don't know. I think it's obvious that didn't happen. And then we know it wasn't Craner because he was out that night getting murdered by Ragabi and kind of Mark. He was out getting handled by Ragabi and Mark. So who was holding the levers while Milchick went to Dylan's house to go talk to him? It had to be somebody. I don't think it was Mark. I think it was probably either both Helena and Natalie, or just Helena, or just Natalie. Probably both, because as we saw, it wouldn't be very secure if you had like a set in stone plan to go to this person's house and show them this existed and talk to them. Because I think that's why he went. He wanted to show him it existed, but he wanted to make sure it worked. It went through and it worked, and that's why he went all the way to his house to talk to him. It had nothing to do with the little card. Maybe it did. Maybe the card was really, really important, and that's why he went there. I don't think so. I think he wanted to prove that it worked. He couldn't just outright do it for no reason because he would have been reprimanded. He could have been fired. So he had to come up with a logical reason for doing that. And there's a possibility that there's other ways to trigger the overtime contingency. If that's the case, then I don't know why there would have been a point in making the MDR department read a passage that said there had to be two people to pull the levers. they could have just made it be one person like it was. And they could have even had Dylan go to his house and add like another little scene. There was no reason to make it so that Dylan had to stay back. Other than to later have the question of, if that's the case, then who stayed back to help Milchick? Yeah. And that night, was one of the only nights, that was the only night, I think, in the whole show where they bothered to show what Grainer was doing outside of the headquarters or outside of the administration building. Why? It's all linked together. It has to do with the fact that they wanted you to ask that question, and it's important. So, and like when I know like the argument to that's going to be, oh, well, when Coble called him to tell him what was happening, he sprinted to go stop Dylan, and he did. But remember when she called him, he wasn't like, what do you mean? Or like, what? Like, he didn't seem confused. He shouted, I think, like shit or some other expletive, and then he sprinted there because I think maybe he'd like forgotten that he didn't know when they were going to do it, right? Like, he just wanted them to know this was a possibility. I do not think that he wanted this to happen the night or at the exact time that Helena was giving a speech about Severance at a gala. Like, I do not think that that's what he wanted. And maybe he didn't forget. He knew it was going on. Perhaps that's why he was still in the building. Or it might have been because he thought Dylan was in the perpetuity wing. Whatever. I think it had more to do with the fact that he knew that a gala was going on. And that's why he was that's why he was panicked. It was not because he didn't want that happening at all. I think if Helena is either traveling to the severed floor as her innie, or if she is reintegrated, the board or whoever does not know about it, I think she is doing that at her own volition. I think they are under the impression that she is traveling down there as her outie. Or her innie. I might have said all that in reverse. One thing that I am going to speculate on is that Helena's, and it ties into that last one, I do not think like her sole reason for this is anger or resentment or surveillance. I think that it's deeper than that. I think that she is interested in Helly's life and she wanted to experience that. Who knows? Maybe if she reintegrated, she ended up feeling really bad for the innies, and that could possibly explain like that weird little dialogue she had where she cursed innies or outies and said they weren't the same, and she wanted them to all burn in hell. That could have obviously been either one of Helly or Helena talking, but it could also be Helena integrated talking, kind of feeling bad for what her family was doing. I am in the camp that I think Miss Wong is Mark and Gemma's biological daughter. Now, that does not mean that I think they got pregnant in like a normal way. I don't think she died long enough ago for her to have gotten kidnapped or whatever by Lumen and then gotten pregnant somehow. with like in vitro fertilization from Mark. And then I don't think it's been long enough for that to have the child that age. I do think that somehow, at some point, this child was created. Her consciousness, in Lumen's mind at least, was created by Lumen. I'll get into that later. And I definitely think the way she behaves and acts, it's like there's something off with her. And there's a few reasons I have that I think this. It's not just because of the casting. That is one reason. I think she just looks like she could be Mark and Gemma's daughter. It's an interesting casting choice, to say the least. Especially because of my other reasons. We've never seen any other children that I remember inside of Lumen, especially not working. So this is the first time we've seen it. It's weird. Mr. Milchick seems like uneasy at times around Miss Wong, especially when they're alone and he isn't trying to fake nice. I think uneasy or suspicious is the right word, and he also seemed uneasy with the experimenting that was going on by Coble with Gemma and Mark. So if my kind of main intuition is right about him, that he just wants to go to work and do a good job and make sure his employees hit their quotas, he's probably not a fan that the company keeps bringing up like mutants of Mark's family and forcing him to unknowingly work with them. It's probably a lot of nonsense for him, and if he has a conscience, he probably isn't a fan of it. And then, like I had just said, Lumen has a history of putting Mark's loved ones in front of him and like seeing how he reacts, either because it's like some kind of experiment, or they think it's going to be some kind of intrinsic motivation for his very mysterious and very important work. This is a good one. If Gemma eventually gets sent back to the real world, which might be their goal, especially if it has to do with wanting to make the outside Mark happy again, so that inside Mark keeps doing such a great job. One way to encourage inside Mark to keep going would be if he knew he had a daughter that was trapped there. And last thing, the show explicitly mentions that Mark and Gemma, to his knowledge, don't have any children, but they did try and they were suffering from infertility struggles, which, in my opinion, gives some credence that at some point they might have donated eggs or sperm to some kind of a fertility clinic, and that's how they might have that information. And the main point, because I thought maybe there was like a plot hole at some stages where it was like, well, wait a minute, this company that caught these people possibly exposing all their secrets out there in the world, and they just like let them choose whether to come back to work, and they fired them instead of killing them or kidnapping them. What's the deal here? Because we also see that they're keeping at least one person prisoner in this place. Miss Casey is going from the severed floor at work, and her severed personality is being tested on, but she thinks she's going up there and having a normal life. So she's something, I think that I've heard the creators said that they're not clones, but for right now, I'm going to use that word because maybe it's really her and she actually didn't die and they took her in. But I have a hard time believing that if she didn't really die. I think she did have to die because Lumen's morality is that if your consciousness was created like normally outside of Lumen, like your parents got pregnant with you and they gave birth to you, and the consciousness you have right now is based on all those memories, they will generally treat you like a person. They will abide by laws and regulations when it comes to you. They will give you a new hire paperwork that outlines everything they're supposed to. It will probably be hard to sue them because they did such a thorough job of making sure everything they had to do was done. So, but if you have a consciousness that was created in Lumen, regardless of what body you're in, at that point, they no longer consider you a person, and they can use you for all the testing and all the labor they want. And the excuse they're going to use now and years later when they apologize for it is that, well, we just don't really consider them humans. Or in the future, well, you know, it was a different time back then. We didn't realize that they were humans too. And that's what is going to be the narrative. That's how they feel. That's how you can kind of sew up these plot holes of why would they not just kill all of these people, or why would they not just lock them in the basement? Because they respect your autonomy as long as you're an outie, I guess. Like a normal outie just with a normal life. It's fine. You can leave whenever you want. You can come back whenever you want. But the second you switch into that any consciousness, you're ours. Now, yeah, same thing with child labor. Obviously they're okay with child labor because I think that baby was created in a petri dish with stored away biological material that they used to make this child in order to persuade one of their employees to stay there. Now, a few things that I still kind of have no idea about, this is in my further unknowns list, is that I don't know what Gemma is. I don't know if she died and they resuscitated her. I don't think so, because I think at that point her consciousness would still count as not being Lumen created, but maybe not. Maybe they think, hey, if we brought you back, maybe they brought her back to life using very specialized technology that wasn't out yet. I could see that happening. Yeah, I don't know if she's a clone. Apparently, clones aren't a thing. I don't know if at any point in her severed journey, I don't know where else she goes, but I don't know if at any point in that she has any of her old memories as Gemma. I don't know if Gemma is left at all. I think it's probably more likely that there is none of the old Gemma left. Now, she might still have the same personality, but none of the memories. And that gets into the real nitty-gritty core of the show. Who are you without your memories? And I think the show displays this, and I think that you are probably a lot of the same person, some of the same person without your memories. But at the same time, what about the people that love you romantically? What if the person who loves you romantically realized that you now have no memories about them? What if it was the other way around? What if it was both of you, And there's some other TV shows and movies that explore this really beautifully. I had watched the movie Dark City right the night before I filmed this show, and they have some themes that tie together beautifully. And one of them is love. And one of the things I really liked about Dark City is that it didn't do the thing that this show kind of does, where in the end it's oh, well, the person has no memory. Do they still love the person? And what they always do to demonstrate that they do still love them is they show like little bits of memory still lingering. I'm like, okay, so your point is that memory is required to love somebody or to have a personality, right? In Dark City, it doesn't, I don't want to spoil it too much, but it doesn't really do that. It demonstrates in that movie, its opinion is that you can love somebody and have that love flow through to a different life where you guys have no memory of each other and there's no kind of little lingering memories of trees or high heels or whatever else happens in this show. But I do still like this show. I just thought that was a point. One of the things I know, like, I just watched another review about something that had to do with, there's been other car crashes that had to do, like, with Lumen or Lumen's employees or competitors where the people were badly burned in them. And I'm wondering if this could indicate that there's being bodies swapped out or something. Again, that seems far-fetched from a company that sends its HR guy to your house with a basket of fresh fruit to ask you to come back to work for them or to offer you more money and things like it just seems like it's not meshing. A company that's willing to blow up cars, murder people, and swap out bodies so they can take people into their underlayer and test on them. I don't think they would use I don't think they'd be killing living people to do this stuff too. I do think they're somehow creating new people and new memories. I don't know what Cold Harbor is. I don't know what it's for. I guess most likely theories are that they're trying to resurrect Kier Egan. But then what does it have to do with Gemma? Why does Mark have to do it? And why does... Yeah, because I think the main theory, the most popular theory is that they're trying to resurrect Kier Egan and put his mind or his memories or his personality, one of those, into Gemma's body. And that's where it's like, if that ends up being what it is, they really need to have a good explanation for why it had to be Gemma and why Mark had to do it. I don't know. I don't know about that. I think there might be more of a possibility that the Egans have already been having their minds passed down or put in computers or something, and they didn't need these people. They didn't need Gemma to do it, right? One thing I'm still confused about is I wrote something up here. It must have deleted some of it. Well, the point is that we don't know who's on what side. Almost no one. I think we can safely assume that the main character of the show, the main protagonist, Mark, is whose side we need to be on. Now, other than Mark, I do not know anything. I don't know what side anybody is on. The most confident I'm pretty confident that Devin is on Mark's side. After that, I have no idea. I don't know. I can't tell. And it seems like everybody's against everybody else, especially like the higher ups. I mean, Kobol's against Natalie, against Milchick. Milchick is kind of against Natalie sometimes, and then he's for her. Helena's against Kobol and with Kobol and with Milchick, and then Milchick is with Kobol, then not with Kobol, and then with the higher ups, and then not with the higher ups, and seemingly always with Helena. So Milchick and Helena are the only ones that so far I have not seen any kind of distrust or conflict with. In fact, Helena seems to deeply trust Milchick, and Milchick seems to blindly follow and listen and trust Helena. So there's something there. I don't know. But the point is, with that, let me read my last thing. I have a hard time understanding how Kobol was able to do everything she was doing, like, at work in a Lumen facility. She apparently, like, wasn't getting approval for these different experiments she was doing with Gemma, like, wanting them to do a bunch of different wellness checks. And then at one point she sends her back to the testing floor, like, to do what? Why is Coble allowed to order testing on Mark's wife to see if they can remember each other? I didn't really understand, like, why she had so much authority to just kind of do whatever she wanted in this science lab that she didn't even really work at. She was a manager of a floor of an office building. So I don't know why she had that power or why she was able to do what she was doing. And maybe that'll be explained later. It almost seems like maybe it could be a plot hole later on if it's not explained why she was able to do so much stuff, right? But my question is, if she was acting alone, why would Lumen allow her so much freedom? Moving forward, some observations are, regardless of... Oh, I meant to mention, I have like a slight suspicion if the Helena thing ends up not being true, then I have a tiny suspicion, maybe like a 20%, 10% type thing, that getting reintegrated actually just basically kills your outie and turns your innie on 100% of the time. There was nothing that Petey did or said that made me think he couldn't just be his innie. That's learned more things about his outside life, but really only has the memories of what his innie has experienced. I probably believe the Helena thing more, so I'm less inclined to believe that. And we did see the two little lines merge together, so just food for thought. And now, regardless of whether Mark is now both personalities or just his innie, he will know that Helly lied about what happened during the OTC. And previews from future episodes have showed us that they kiss at some point in the future, intimately. So either she tells him the truth, that whatever that is, whether it's that she's Helena and she's scared that Helly's going to try to kill her again if she sent her back, but she understands now, or she is reintegrated and she tells him that. She's like, no, I am Helly, but I'm also Helena. Like, here's what happened. Or 3, he's just using her to try to get close to her. He knows that she's Helena. And he's just going to try to get information from her. And then I think with all these higher ups, all showing signs of faltering and not really being that into Kier Egan as much as they may say on the surface, they're all... What I wrote was, this series could have a very bleak ending. Every high-ranking Lumen employee we've seen has doubts about the system, yet they ultimately conform. Even if individuals rebel, the company will persist, and new enforcers will replace the old ones. Which I think could be where the series goes. I do hope if it goes that way, which wouldn't really break my heart too much. I think it's kind of based in reality. I at least hope Mark gets to be with his wife and his daughter, if that's who Miss Wong is. I hope there's at least a happy ending for Mark. So that's my theories as of right now. Can't wait for episode 4 and to see how much stuff I got wrong. I don't really have any theories about the goats. Apparently the goats were not like supposed to be written in as that serious of a thing originally, but people liked it and the writers wrote more about it, so I don't think it's like a major plot point. Anyways, thanks for watching my video. I hope you liked it.